Hi, welcome to Breakthrough Ideas in Training webinar series. I am Cordell Riley, president of Instructorled Training. It is my absolute pleasure to certainly welcome our audience today, but it's also my pleasure to welcome our guest of honor. I have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Michael Arena, who is the Chief Talent Officer with General Motors. Michael, welcome to the session today.
Thank you, Cordell.
Good, good. So, Michael, certainly everybody knows the name General Motors and knows the great brand and group that you're a part of, but certainly tell our audience a little bit about Michael and why training and learning are so important to you.
Yeah, I'd be glad to do that. So just a little bit about my background and how I ended up in this space, and then can take a deep dive into the learning and training and leadership development aspects of this space. I'm an engineer, so I started my career as an engineer. Love process, love numbers, but at some point got fairly bored with that, and the whole concept of human dynamics and learning and enabling learning within an organization became a passion of mine. So I went back, did some graduate work, and I think I would classify myself as a social scientist today, and spent a lot of time thinking about learning, social learning in particular inside of organizations, and most importantly, why ongoing learning as a personal lifetime learner myself is so essential to progress within organizations.
Yeah, great point. You said several things that I can go deep into, and I'm going to enjoy this talk. Lifelong learning, process, all great pieces, and I'm sure we're going to touch on those as we keep going on here. Yeah, Michael, General Motors. I mean, again, obviously our audience has heard the name and heard the brand. Again, goes without saying. I would find it interesting, and I'm sure our audience would. What does the learning training structure inside of General Motors look like? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I sure can. The broader organization, so we're very complex. 220,000 employees across the globe. We do business and we sell in hundreds of countries, and we do business. We've got people stationed in 80 plus countries across the world. So it's not a real easy answer in regards to how we're organized, but the general response to that question is we're organized by a center of expertise. And we've got, within my shop, I own the broader talent portfolio. So we own talent management, we own the talent acquisition activities, a little bit around analytics, which I will get into probably later as it relates to learning. But then we have learning and leadership development from a centralized perspective that's supported across the globe in regards to what are the cutting edge methodologies, what are the sort of emergent trends in the learning space, and my team covers all of that. We also have global enterprise-wide training and learning, so that's some of the what you would consider to be corporate required programs.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes both leadership development activities, but also technical content around that. Finally, I would say when it comes to things like dealer networks and engineering expertise, we've got pockets of functionally owned learning centers out across the globe. They own the content. They know that material better than anyone else could. That's their core competence. So my team enables it, partners with them, and looks at infrastructure and those types of things. But in regards to content ownership, there is some degree of decentralization in the overall model.
Okay. Michael, when you say enable, what does that mean? What is that? How do you work with that group when you say you enable? What does that mean?
We manage vendor relationships. We manage any back-end stuff in regards to learning management systems, in regards to how do you measure progress. So basically, you could think of us beyond the content ownership that we have responsibilities for in the core areas I've already mentioned as the key sort of architecture that strings everything else together, links everything else up.
Good deal, good deal. Michael, as I've been doing these sessions, one thing that I've heard come up quite often, and sounds like you're kind of describing it here, is people talking about building a culture. Our organization has a culture that we're going to be a learning, a training organization, and building that culture. And just hearing you describe, what you have inside of General Motors, it sounds like you have that culture. And how would you talk about that? How does somebody go about building that culture of learning inside of their organization?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it it's back to the initial personal question. We all, many of us, strive to be lifetime learners, and we've got to look at organizations much in the same way. I just read a stat the other day that I thought was really intriguing, and this is more true in certain spaces. But you'll be at the height of your career if you're in the IT space. Just to give you one example, you will be at the height of your knowledge peak at about the age 32. So what that says to me, now different functions are much, more senior than that. I won't say older, but
Yes.
the sort of threshold is much more senior, and it's more of a, tacit acquired knowledge perspective. But when you get into spaces like engineering and IT and design and some of these, fields, analytics, predictive analytics, some of these fields that are emerging rapidly and radically, across the world, you reach that peak pretty quickly in your career. So we've got to constantly be ensuring that we're providing opportunities for people to stay current, ensuring that we're providing opportunities for people to challenge themselves to want to be current. So it's
Hmm.
much more than just offering up solutions, and much more about an overall entire culture that strives to be adaptive and strives to be responsive, to emerging trends, patterns, customers' needs, and whatever's happening in, sort of the social environment externally.
Okay. Michael, you mentioned emerging trends and things of that nature that's taking place in our space. What are you guys doing differently from a learning training space inside of General Motors that you think others might would find interesting? What are you guys doing differently as it relates to those types of things?
We're doing many of the traditional things that you would expect out of a company of our size. We offer modules. We do a lot of online work. We essentially offer certifications and design programs for a given client, and some of that's virtual. Much of that is classroom oriented, and we've got a pretty good blend of the two. I think what we're doing that's cutting edge and unique and different is thinking about this from a much more of a social perspective.
Mm.
So I oftentimes say knowledge is a commodity these days. BG before Google, knowledge was really important. Now today, we can Google anything, we can YouTube anything, and within an instant, you can get whatever the latest expertise is out there. So what we were used to doing in the learning space has shifted, and now it's much more real time. And learning organizations, vendors are supporting that by providing real time applications and sort of bite-sized content so that you can absorb it in the moment. However, what I would say that we're doing differently is how do you build that around a social construct? How do you encourage and enable ongoing interactions and exchanges with individuals, one-to-one, sometimes one-to-many, so that people are not just getting the content knowledge, which is critical, but they're also getting the sort of the relevance of the corporation, the relevance of a given organization, and their understanding of how does this fit culturally, and who are the people that I should go to if I want to influence. And so we do a lot of work around understanding your social context, a lot of work around providing spaces, both physical and virtual, for people to come together and have ongoing discussions, and really enabling the opportunity for knowledge to emerge, locally with a lot of subject matter experts, as opposed to always being top down and sort of centrally driven.
Yeah. So, Michael, it's interesting you talk real deeply on the social. And, as I was looking and reading and talking about what's going on in the training world, and certainly the emergence of social is one of the big trends that's happening. It's probably going to continue to happen. It sounds like you guys are well versed in it. If you had to give some tips to our audience about if you're thinking about moving social, here's some things you might want to think about, consider. If you had to give some tips or advice to our audience, what could you share as they're thinking about how does this impact and what can we do inside of our organization from a social perspective?
It's a great question. Thank you for asking. It's not a build it and they will come strategy. I will start with that. A lot of us think that, hey, if we build these great social platforms, people are just going to go to them and they're going to learn. We're all saturated. We all have way too many things to do in a given day, and just building another platform and being wishful or hopeful that something significant is going to happen on that platform is not nearly enough. It is a bit of a science, and you need to think about it in a much more dynamic manner. You need to, so this is where the social science stuff will really come out. But you need to think about, okay, so where are my natural clusters within an organization? So not even within a function, but not even a function, but within a function, or within a geography. What are the groups that interact frequently? What are the groups that need to interact frequently? And how do we start to create some bounding, some boundaries or borders, if you will, around some of those groups and invite them in, as opposed to just doing an open platform sort of social learning exchange, which I have not had success with. Create a bounded community in many regards. Sometimes that means a private community online. Sometimes it means a private community face to face, and then challenge them. You've got to initiate it. You've got to, one, bound it. Two, you've got to enable it by initiating through a challenge. What's a better way for us to engage early career people, and start with a dialogue and then see what emerges. And then our role as learning professionals is to continue to enable that, continue to encourage it, and at times, and this is sometimes a trick, at times step back and let it happen and let it emerge, as opposed to feeling like we've always got to force it. So it's got to be, short. I mean, that was a long answer. Short, how do you bound it into clusters? How do you initiate it with critical sort of current challenges and or core questions? And then how do you facilitate and enable it over the long haul in order to encourage it to continue to happen?
Great, some great tips, Michael. You said something that was very interesting at the end of that. I just want to go back first. Like you said, don't be afraid to step back. That's what I heard you say. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, we all love knowledge, and many of us in the training learning profession have been the kings of or the masters of knowledge and information. We like to stand up in front of a group. We like to deliver, and again, I think there's very much a time and place for that. But when again, based on the knowledge curve that I shared with you earlier, if you're bringing in people that are very knowledgeable in their core function, 10 years or even 3 years on a school, we've got to find a way to enable that. We've got to find a way to tap into that capacity and that knowledge. So some leaders are just not that comfortable, enabling an environment and not really truly knowing what's about ready to happen. And we've got to become much more comfortable with the sort of ambiguity of what might happen, number one, and number two, the fact that somebody else might have an opinion that's better than ours. And that's not easily digestible for many folks.
Yeah, well said, well said. And Michael, you touched on this some as we were certainly talking about social, talking about kind of what's different inside of General Motors. But talk to me a little bit about face-to-face training versus virtual training. What's your views and takes as you kind of look at those different ways of delivering training inside of an organization?
Yeah, I think that the learning space is migrating more and more towards content still is critical, but based on what I said earlier, that becoming more commoditized, many of us need to turn our focus on how do we influence, how do we encourage the right kind of dialogue, how do we influence across an organization, and the best knowledge in the world is useless if you can't get it implemented. So it doesn't matter what you know if you can't influence yourself across the organization or influence your understanding across the organization. So, there is a trade-off, I believe, that we make whenever we go to exclusively virtual or video platforms, and that is that you don't get the eyeball-to-eyeball interaction, and you don't build the networks, and you don't get to understand who the go-to people are on certain things. So we try to do a lot of face-to-face interaction. We complement it. Again, we use knowledge networks and a lot of other activities to get the information out there, but I like to characterize it as two channels. There's an information or knowledge channel that happens very, very well one-to-many across the virtual networks, if you will. But there's also an influencing channel. And the influencing channel has to happen face-to-face. I mean, we are social creatures, social beings, and even if it's through video, much like what we are doing here, I can have a much better dialogue with you and can see how you're interacting and responding with me, what you're interested in and what you're not interested in, to decide what I'm going to go towards next. And when I'm on the phone or when I'm in a video in a very sterile environment that doesn't have two-way interaction, I don't know that. And
Yeah.
so I would never say we can migrate exclusively to this virtual platform. I think stand up, face to face, and even one to one interactions are going to continue to be essential for us.
Yeah, and I love the way you said it, Mike. And I want to make sure I got this right because I think it was a big distinction here. You kind of drew two paths. One is knowledge share, which you're saying you think is very appropriate for asynchronous, self-paced. Go to online and get those video types of things, maybe. And then you had influence that you think is very, very appropriate for face-to-face, those types of things. That was a really good distinction. I just want to make sure I captured that right.
That's exactly right. And we push everything we do through those lenses. So if it's technical in nature, then the mass distribution channel is actually probably okay. If it's something that is far more nuanced, like how do you lead or how do you have difficult conversations with people, that's something that I continue to encourage to be face to face as often as possible. Of
Yeah.
course, it's not always feasible, so you got to weigh that with what's the cost and how do we get content out there and what are the trade-offs and all that.
Yeah. Michael, would you be able to give me any idea of the mix inside of General Motors? How much instructor-led, how much technology support? I know it's a big question, big organization, but any general idea?
Yeah, wow, that's a tough question. I would say just with the stuff that we drive, it's much more towards the face-to-face. So if I think about the programs that we design and develop, if I had to guess, and you forced me to put a number out there, I would say it's probably 40, 60% being, we want to do something face-to-face and we want to interact. A lot of that's based on the content that we deliver. It probably is flipped in the other direction whenever you start to talk about the technical side of things.
Good deal, good deal. So, Michael, we talked a lot about delivery and some of the things that are taking place from how you get it out there, how you make sure you got the right channels of distribution. How do you measure the effectiveness of learning and training inside your organization? That's another big thing that I'm hearing. How do we step back and make sure this is working and doing what we want it to do? How do you measure that?
It's one of my favorite questions, by the way, Cordell, so thank you. I think you start by understanding what you're going after in the very beginning. So I think measurement starts before you ever deliver a single piece or bit of content. And I actually, I will probably be an anomaly on this one. I actually don't get too concerned about course evaluations, and I mean, of course we look at them, of course we do them, and you always have to respond and react. But I get much more, if we're using Kirkpatrick's 4 levels, I get much more concerned and spend most of our effort on 3 and 4,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe in some regards even outside of the 4 levels of evaluation. We look at tangible impact on the business, not even necessarily from a business result standpoint, but what's happening with the talent pipeline, what's happening with filling knowledge voids across the broader organization. And I think, again, just reiterating something I said a few moments ago, I think that all begins before the beginning of any content. If you're not targeted and you don't know what you're delivering and for what purpose, it's almost impossible to measure whether or not you've closed that gap. So we are incredibly targeted around. We don't start with here's a program. We don't start with this is a need. We don't even in many cases do the traditional needs assessment. We start with where's the business at? What are the voids in the business? What talent or knowledge gaps might we have? And we've got some predictive analytic models that we use to be able to answer those questions. And we might not necessarily say this is a sales management program. We might say that this is a sales management program for these 2 regions because they are the 2 that are underperforming the other 7. And we think that they're missing some knowledge gaps or there are some knowledge gaps, and this is what we're going to do. And then we can evaluate whether or not we've closed the gap. And we will actually even do controlled experimentation.
Wow. So, Michael, how do I start that inside of my organization? So, if I'm a training professional, I'm listening to this and I hear that and I said, that's great. I mean, am I initiating this? Do I have a seat at the table with the business principals? Am I obviously I'm a student of my business, so I should know what's going on. But if I'm a training professional, I'm trying to do that. How do I start that? Because I completely agree. You want to get to level 3 and level 4, but how do I just start that inside of my group?
I think it all starts with the contracting conversation. So when a business leader comes to you and says, Cordell, I need marketing expertise in my organization, I think it starts right there. You've got to really start to clarify what the real need is. Hardly ever is the presenting, usually it's not a problem that's presented, it's a solution.
Yeah.
The rare cases where it's actually a problem, hardly ever is the presenting problem the real problem. And I think we as learning professionals, as HR professionals, need to resist the temptation of serving our clients with their immediate requests. So I think we've got to put our expertise hats on. We've got to dive deep into dialogue and ask the core questions. So tell me more, Cordell, about why you believe that's true. Where have you actually seen that that's not true? Could you tell me about an area inside the marketing organization that's incredibly successful? And start that inquiry process and really push hard to try to better understand the problem before you ever dive deep into it. I think that's absolutely essential on the very front end. Then I think go collect data and just completely resist. The other thing I would say is completely resist this temptation to apply what I call feel-good, one-size-fits-all solutions. Oftentimes we're very guilty in this space of saying, we're not doing something right. We must do one of two things. We must either train people or we must communicate better. And whenever I get that, it's a red flag for me. And we dive deeper into the inquiry process first, and then go collect evidence in the background to try to better understand in a much more targeted fashion what the gaps are.
Good deal. Good deal. Great information there, Michael. So, Michael, again, as you know, our audience is a group of training and learning professionals that are really trying to take some time to focus on making themselves better. And we certainly talked about a lot of different things, what you guys are doing inside of General Motors that's really moving learning forward. If you had to leave our audience with some big rocks, that if they really want to step back and focus on making learning better inside of their organization, what big rocks would you have to share with our group that they can take away from this today?
First off, big rocks must be the nomenclature used in Charlotte, because I haven't heard that since I moved away. So you brought a smile to my face as you said so, or asked so. A couple things would really jump out at me, and I didn't say it quite this way, previously, but think about designing experiences as opposed to delivering content. And I think if you lift the way that we've thought about this, if we lift or shift our mental model is a better way of saying it, towards I want to create an experience where people are enabled to do something differently. You don't narrow in on the solution so quickly. So we do a lot of things that are what I consider to be active learning. So we do hackathons, we do Shark Tank types of events that require people to go out and find the knowledge on their own. And all we're really doing is issuing a challenge and asking people to go discover and find that content on their own. And we're teaching the process of learning then, as opposed to just delivering content. So I think the very first thing I would say is design experiences for people. It probably won't surprise you that I'll say social matters, and that I think of this as a social phenomena as much as a technical or knowledge phenomena. So teach people how to navigate that network. Teach people how to tap into the experts that exist every single day and broker the organization to really better learn when they need it. So those would be two really, really big things that I would want to leave your audience with.
Good deal. Michael, thank you for that. Thank you for those big rocks. I'm sure you can use that up in Detroit as well. You can absolutely use it when you're back in Charlotte, but thank you for that. Thank you for the great information you've shared. I've really enjoyed this session. I've certainly learned some things, and I'm sure that our audience has as well. So thank you again. Let me also thank our audience for joining us today for Breakthrough Ideas and Webinar Series. I would absolutely encourage you to keep coming back for the remaining sessions. I would also like to remind you that if you would like to have this session, this one and all of the others are available for download, and we'll have information that can tell you how to get to those. So Michael, I'm going to bid you farewell. Thank you for the time. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Cordell. Good day.
Yeah.